October 15, 1917. Dawn breaks over the Vincennes military barracks outside Paris. A woman stands before 12 French soldiers, their rifles raised. She refuses the blindfold. Her name is Mata Hari, exotic dancer, courtesan, and allegedly the most dangerous spy of World War I. But was she really? Or was she simply a woman who dared to live too freely in a world at war? This is the true story of Margaretha Zell, the woman behind the legend. For over a century, Mata Hari's name has been synonymous with seduction and betrayal. Countless books, films, and legends have painted her as a femme fatale who used her beauty to extract military secrets. But the truth, as you'll discover, is far more tragic and far more human. This is a story of reinvention, survival, and how one woman became the scapegoat for an entire nation's failures. Our story begins not in the glamorous salons of Paris, but in the quiet Dutch town of Leeuwarden. On August 7, 1876, Margaretha Geertruida Zell was born into a world of middle-class respectability. Her father, Adam Zell, was a successful hat shop owner with grand ambitions. Young Margaretha was different from other Dutch girls. With her dark hair, olive skin, and striking features, she stood out in a sea of blonde, blue-eyed children. Her father called her his little princess, but that fairy tale would soon shatter. When Margaretha was 13, financial ruin struck the Zell family. Her father's business collapsed, her parents divorced, and within 2 years, her mother died. At 15, Margaretha Zell was essentially an orphan. At 18, desperate to escape her circumstances, Margaretha answered a newspaper advertisement. Officer on home leave from Dutch East Indies would like to meet girl of pleasant character. Object matrimony. The man was Rudolph MacLeod, a colonial army captain 21 years her senior, with a drinking problem and a violent temper. But to Margaretha, he represented escape and adventure. They married in July 1895. Within months, Margaretha was pregnant and sailing to the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia. She was leaving behind everything she'd ever known, heading toward what she hoped would be an exotic new life. Instead, she was sailing toward tragedy. Life in Java was nothing like Margaretha had imagined. MacLeod was a brutal alcoholic who beat her regularly and openly kept Javanese mistresses. Margaretha gave birth to 2 children, Norman and Jean Louise, and found herself trapped in a nightmare marriage in a foreign land. But Java would give her something else. Her first glimpse of Indonesian culture, dance, and mythology. The temple dancers, with their hypnotic movements and exotic costumes, fascinated her. Here, she discovered an escape, not in geography, but in transformation. Then came the event that would haunt Margaretha forever. In June 1899, both children fell violently ill. The cause remains disputed. Some say mercury poisoning by a disgruntled servant seeking revenge on MacLeod. Others point to treatment errors. Norman, her beloved son, died. He was only 2 years old. Jean Louise survived, but the marriage did not. The couple returned to the Netherlands in 1902, and by 1903, they had divorced. MacLeod took custody of their daughter and later cut off all contact. Margaretha had lost everything. At 27, Margaretha Geertruida Zell was alone, nearly penniless and desperate. She moved to Paris, the city of reinvention, and did what countless women throughout history have done when society left them no other option. She would use the only currency she had left: her body, her mystery, her ability to perform. But Margaretha would not simply become another chorus girl or courtesan. No, she would become something Paris had never seen before. She would become Mata Hari. The name Mata Hari means Eye of the Day, the sun in Malay. Margaretha crafted an elaborate backstory. She was a sacred temple dancer from Java, trained in ancient erotic rituals, a princess of exotic mystery. None of it was true, but Paris didn't care. Paris was hungry for the exotic, for the Orient, for anything that felt dangerous and sensual, and Margaretha Zell understood her audience perfectly. March 13th, 1905. The Musée Guémet, a museum of Asian arts. Paris's elite gathered for a private performance. What they witnessed shocked and thrilled them. Mata Hari performed what she called sacred Indian dances, wearing layers of translucent veils, jeweled breastplates, and elaborate headdresses. As the dance progressed, the veils came off, one by one. It wasn't quite nudity. She wore a jeweled bra and strategic coverings, but it was sensational. Paris had never seen anything like it. Overnight, Mata Hari became the sensation of Paris. Newspapers couldn't get enough of her. She performed at the most exclusive venues, commanded extraordinary fees, and captivated the imagination of an entire city. But Mata Hari wasn't just a dancer. She was a master of personal branding before the term existed. She gave mysterious interviews, hinting at temple initiations and sacred knowledge. She was exotic in an era obsessed with Orientalism, liberated in a society that still kept women tightly corseted, both literally and figuratively. Mata Hari's dancing career was spectacular but brief. By her early 30s, younger dancers were emerging and her novelty was fading. But she had cultivated something more sustainable, a network of wealthy, powerful lovers. She became a courtesan, a demi-mondaine, moving through European high society, from Paris to Berlin, from Madrid to Vienna. Her lovers included military officers, politicians, industrialists, and aristocrats. She lived in luxury, wore the finest clothes, and survived by her wits and her willingness to please powerful men. By 1914, she was 40 years old and still trying to maintain the lifestyle she'd built. Then the world exploded into war. August 1914. The Great War began and Europe tore itself apart. Millions of men marched to their deaths in the trenches. Borders closed. Suspicions grew. Everyone became a potential enemy. And Mata Hari, who had spent her career moving freely between countries, entertaining men of all nationalities, was suddenly in a very dangerous position. Mata Hari's international lifestyle, once her greatest asset, now made her deeply suspect. She had German lovers. She had French lovers. She had Russian lovers. She spoke multiple languages and traveled constantly. To the paranoid minds of wartime intelligence services, she looked exactly like a spy. But was she, or was she simply a woman trying to survive, caught between empires at war? This question would determine whether she lived or died. The truth about Mata Hari's espionage activities is murky, contradictory, and probably will never be fully known. What we do know is this. In 1914, while traveling through Germany, Mata Hari was approached by German intelligence. They gave her money, 20,000 francs, and the code name H21. But what did she actually do for this money? This is where the story becomes complicated. According to French intelligence, Mata Hari was a dangerous double agent, passing military secrets to the Germans that cost thousands of Allied lives. They claimed she used invisible ink, secret codes, and her intimate relationships with high-ranking officers to gather intelligence. The evidence seemed damning. Intercepted German communications mentioned Agent H21. German intelligence files confirmed they had recruited her. She had received money from German sources during wartime. But was she actually spying? Or was she being paid for information she never delivered? Here's where it gets even stranger. In 1916, Mata Hari approached French intelligence herself and offered to spy for France. She was by then struggling financially. The war had disrupted her income from wealthy lovers. She needed money. French intelligence officer Captain Georges Ledoux met with her. He was suspicious from the start, but he played along. He gave her minor assignments, possibly just to see what she would do. Mata Hari may have believed she was working for France, while France believed she was working for Germany. Or perhaps she was simply trying to play both sides and collect money from both. In Madrid, late 1916, Mata Hari had a relationship with Major Arnold Colley, the German military attaché. French intelligence was monitoring German communications, and they intercepted messages from Colley about Agent H21 passing information. This seemed to confirm their worst suspicions. But many historians now believe this was a setup, that Colley, knowing the French were listening, deliberately sent messages about H21 to expose her, either to get rid of a useless agent or to create a diversion. Mata Hari may have been sacrificed by the very people who recruited her. February 13, 1917. Mata Hari was arrested in her Paris hotel room. She was taken to Saint-Lazare prison and charged with espionage. The French government needed a scapegoat. The war was going terribly. Mutinies were breaking out in the French army. Morale was collapsing. And here was a perfect target, a foreign woman, sexually liberated, who had consorted with the enemy. She was everything conservative France feared and despised. Whether or not she had actually done any significant spying became almost irrelevant. Mata Hari spent months in St. Lazare prison, in a cell previously occupied by prostitutes and petty criminals. She was interrogated repeatedly. She admitted to receiving money from Germans, but claimed she never passed them any valuable information. She insisted she was working for France. She seemed unable to grasp the mortal danger she was in, believing her connections and charm would save her. They would not. The French government had decided she was guilty, and they were going to make an example of her. July 24th, 1917. Mata Hari's trial began in a closed military court. No press, no public, just military judges and prosecutors determined to convict. Her lawyer, Edouard Clunet, was 74 years old and hopelessly outmatched. He was also likely one of her former lovers, which compromised his effectiveness. The trial was less about uncovering truth and more about confirming a predetermined verdict. The prosecution's case was built on intercepted messages, testimony about her German connections, and speculation about her relationships with military officers. But crucially, they never proved that she had passed specific information that led to military disasters. The claims that she caused the deaths of 50,000 soldiers, a figure that would be repeated for decades, had no factual basis. The intercepted German messages were sent in a code the Germans knew was broken, suggesting they were deliberately exposing her. But none of this mattered to court. Mata Hari defended herself as best she could. She admitted her lifestyle, her many lovers, her acceptance of German money. But she maintained she had never betrayed France, that she had only agreed to spy in order to fund her efforts to get closer to a Russian lover. Her testimony was rambling, sometimes contradictory, and ultimately ineffective. She couldn't prove her innocence, and in wartime, the burden of proof had shifted. She had to prove she wasn't a spy, not the other way around. July 25th, 1917. After just 2 days of trial, the verdict came down. Guilty on all counts. The sentence: death by firing squad. Mata Hari collapsed when she heard the verdict. Her lawyer filed appeals, but they were all rejected. There would be no mercy for the exotic dancer who would become the embodiment of female treachery. Mata Hari spent her final months in prison writing letters, proclaiming her innocence, and desperately trying to secure last-minute reprieves. She wrote to everyone she could think of, former lovers, government officials, anyone with influence. None of them lifted a finger to help her. The woman who had once been the toast of Paris was now completely alone. On October 14th, she was told the execution would take place the next morning. October 15th, 1917. Dawn. Vincennes. Mata Hari was brought to the execution ground. According to witnesses, she refused a blindfold and faced the firing squad directly. She reportedly blew a kiss to her lawyer and the attending priest. At 6 a.m., the 12 soldiers fired. Mata Hari was 41 years old. Her body was not claimed by any family or friends. It was donated to medical science, and her head was preserved. Years later, even that disappeared, stolen or lost from a medical museum. Margaretha Zell, who had once been the most photographed woman in Paris, left behind no grave, no memorial, no physical trace. So what's the truth? Was Mata Hari actually a spy? Modern historians who have examined the evidence believe that she was, at best, an incompetent dilettante who may have passed along trivial information or, at worst, a complete fabrication. Someone the Germans paid but who never delivered anything of value. The French government's own files, declassified decades later, contained no concrete evidence that she had caused any military damage whatsoever. She was almost certainly not the master spy of legend. So why was she executed? Because France needed a scapegoat. By 1917, the war had become a catastrophic meat grinder. The Nivelle offensive had failed disastrously, with hundreds of thousands of casualties for no gain. French soldiers were mutinying. The public was losing faith. The government needed to show they were fighting the enemy within, the spies and traitors who were supposedly stabbing France in the back. Mata Hari was perfect for this role. Foreign-born, sexually promiscuous, mysterious, connected to Germans, she violated every norm of respectable femininity. Making an example of her served multiple purposes. It distracted from military failures, reinforced conservative values, and satisfied public bloodlust. After her death, the legend of Mata Hari only grew. She became the archetype of the female spy, the seductress who uses sex as a weapon, the femme fatale who destroys men. Countless books, plays, films, and operas have told her story, almost always emphasizing the exotic, the erotic, the dangerous. Greta Garbo played her. Marlene Dietrich played her. Countless others have played versions of her. But almost all of these portrayals miss the real story. The story of Margaretha Zell, a woman who was abused, widowed, desperate, and trying to survive in a world that gave women very few options. Today, Mata Hari's story resonates differently. We see her not as a legendary spy or a treacherous seductress, but as a woman who was failed by everyone, by her abusive husband, by the men who used her, by the governments who played games with her life, and finally, by a justice system that needed a sacrifice more than it needed truth. She was punished not for being an effective spy, because she wasn't, but for being a woman who refused to conform. Mata Hari's real crime was living too freely, loving too openly, and refusing to apologize for her survival. In a world at war, she became a symbol of everything that frightened men in power. Female sexuality, foreign influence, independence, mystery. They couldn't control her, so they destroyed her. Her story is a reminder that history is written by the powerful, that legends often obscure truth, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing a woman can do is simply refuse to disappear. Margaretha Zell died at dawn on October 15, 1917. But the questions she raises about justice, gender, and power remain alive. This was Mata Hari, not the legend, but the truth. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please like, subscribe, and share. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on Mata Hari's story. Was she a spy, a scapegoat, or simply a woman trying to survive? Let's discuss.